Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Hamhani, who was just introduced by today's MC. Well, this is International Academic Forum, and we are discussing the value of the Northeast Asia citizen culture and the ways to successfully register the Korean traditional Jang culture on the UNESCO ICH. I would like to take this opportunity to express my thanks for all the dedication that you made. Of course, the Jang culture is a very, very essential, indispensable, and I do hope that this could be registered as a very valuable asset in the UNESCO ICH. I think this is an extremely important process. Well, again, we are discussing the value of the Northeast Asia student culture, not just about the Korea's Jang culture, because Japan as well as China also has a culture of consuming as well as making the Jang. And I think we try to focus, of course, more on the Korea's traditional Jang culture, the inscription effort. So I think this is a very useful opportunity. Northeast Asia has a Jang culture, of course, including Korea, and this is a kind of indispensable the item that we have in our diet. So I believe this is really necessary to register it into the intangible cultural heritage. Of course, I'm not an expert on the Dusan culture itself, so instead, let me introduce some of the policies of the UNESCO ICH as well as the inscription criteria for your better understanding on the UNESCO ICH. So that is the kind of the item that we'll discuss today in my presentation. So as you can see from this slide, you will see the chapter content. So I'll talk about the introduction as well as the list of the UNESCO ICH. And I also briefly talk about the Convention on the UNESCO ICH of Humanity and also the criteria that we need to observe for successful inscription for the UNESCO ICH. And I'll also cover the characteristic of the major food culture and also common features as well as the concluding remark. What I'd like to focus primarily is the 2003 Convention for Safeguarding ICH, where this was officially announced in 2003, and the UNESCO made it very clear to have a strenuous endeavor to safeguard this ICH. So number one objective is, of course, to safeguard the ICH, and then the respect for the ICH of the communities, groups, and people. And the third objective is to promote local, national, and international awareness for the importance of ICH and also to promote the mutual appreciation. So we have these four objectives, and the last one, but not least, that's the international cooperation and assistance. Well, of course, they have very diverse activities and the programs that the UNESCO has proposed. Well, as you know, the UNESCO is executing diverse safeguarding activities. So number one is the making the list of the ICH or intangible cultural heritage. So if you have a chance to visit the homepage or website, you will see the three different types of the list. The first one is the register of the good safeguarding practices, and number two is urgent safeguarding lists. And the third one is a representative list. So there are three major lists that the UNESCO is making. So this is what we call the UNESCO list or the ICH list. And the most commonly mentioned is the representative list, which is shown in the last part of this slide. So we normally talk about the representative list, but the UNESCO is also trying very hard to identify the register of the good safeguarding practices, and at the same time to make the urgent safeguarding list, which may be very much vulnerable right now, that should be immediately protected. This is the status of the UNESCO ICH list. So the total is about 549 elements from 127 the countries. This includes three, the list that I mentioned earlier, and we have four. I told you that we have about 470 elements corresponding to the 117 countries before. Before I talk about the definition and domains of the ICH, we need to have a more clear understanding on this definition. I believe some of you are quite well aware of it, but for the better understanding in the later part of my presentation, I had a summary on this definition and the domain. Well, of course, the UNESCO has been working, really struggling to come up with this definition. So there are a lot of campaigns that had been undergoing so far. So with this background, the ICH safeguarding activities actually started, and they also decided to make the list of the ICH. So in this sense, this actually is not the outcome that had been just came out over the night. They have been highlighting the importance or the safeguarding those important ICH for so long. Well, before we talk about the domain, we just talk about the tangible cultural heritage. So those are the main target. In 1972, the UNESCO Convention was officially announced, and at that time, they focused more on the tangible assets, tangible cultural heritage. So each country tried to make a list, and they also showed their commitment to protect these tangible cultural heritage. But of course, they also paid some attention to the other intangible cultural heritage. So in 1972, the UNESCO Convention was officially announced, and after maybe 10 to 20 years, they also saw the necessity of preserving and safeguarding these intangible cultural heritage. So in 1978, we had the special recommendation by the UNESCO for the safeguarding the traditional culture and the folklore. The UNESCO has been trying very hard, and in 1993, they organized the executive committee. They also introduced the intangible cultural heritage of Korea. So regarding the activities, I think we have Professor Im Do-hee, and she will discuss detail more, because you also participated in the deliberation process, and at the same time, you also made a great contribution to promote the ICH of Korea. So we had the experts as well as academia who made a lot of effort to promote Korea's ICH to the global world. Before, in terms of the area, the key focus was mainly the Western Europe, but these days they also try to expand their horizon and also include some not very distinctive areas. In late 1990s, the UNESCO also paid attention to the Middle East intangible cultural heritage. So registration actually started from that time on. So we have this kind of journey, and in 2003, the convention was officially signed, and we get more familiar with the list of representative as well as the urgent safeguarding list. So regarding the ICH, I think we need to focus more. And because I told you that earlier, the main focus was placed primarily on the Western European countries. But now the focus also has been shifted to the non-European the countries. So I told you that UNESCO has been executing a lot of campaigns as well as the programs and the activities. Well, this is the summary that I prepared in my slide, and you will see the clear definition on the ICH. Of course, experts in this area also joined in this effort. So as you can see from this slide, the definition of the ICH is the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and the cultural spaces associated there with that communities, group, and in some cases, individuals recognized as part of their cultural heritage. And this ICH will be handed down to the next generation. It will be reproduced over the generation after generation. So this is one way to preserve the diversity of the cultural heritage. So now I'd like to go into the domains of the ICH. So the first one is oral tradition and expression, including language, and next is performing art, and also social practices, rituals, and festive events, and knowledge and practice about the nature and the universe, and the traditional craftsmanship. So we have 5 different domains under this ICH. Now let me move on to the next part of my presentation, which is about the criteria of evaluation of representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity. Of course, they set up the list to safeguard this ICH. Of course, they have the screening qualification. I mentioned earlier about the 3 different lists, which is the good safeguarding practice and urgent safeguarding list and the representative list. And today, I'd like to confine my talk mainly on the representative list. So first is about the criteria for successful inscription on the representative list. So the first one is identification and definition of the element. So you need to identify and define the element first of all. And at the same time, you also need to define the element. And I would like to focus 2 key points here. So of course, we start with the identification and definition. So whenever we talk about these 2 conditions, we also need to review the knowledge and skills. So how are the knowledge and the skills related to the element still transmitted today? And at the same time, you also need to think about the social and cultural functions as well as the meaning that it has for the community. And the next one is the contribution to ensuring visibility and awareness and to encouraging the dialogue. So I'm still talking about the evaluation criteria. The next one is about the safeguarding measures. So what are the efforts that you made, I mean, in the past as well as in the current times to safeguard the element? So you also need to have a competent body involved in the safeguarding, and you also need to induce the community participation and consent in the nomination process. And the last one is inclusion of the element in an inventory. So actually inventory is slightly different from the list, because inventory is a kind of more specific list. So we also need to understand if the element is included into the inventory or not. So of course they need to have a kind of the uh, the due diligence and come up with this kind of inventory. So these are the elements for the criteria. So let me move on for more details. So for today's forum, I selected 6 elements out of the 10 to have a better understanding on the value of the ICH. As you can see from this slide, where you will see the table here on the slide. So let me start from the bottom one, because this is actually done in the chronological order. The last one in the bottom is the element from the Mexico. May I have the pointer, please? All right, so let me start from the last one in the bottom. So you will see the Mexico. This is a traditional Mexican cuisine, and the next one from the bottom is the gastronomic meal of the French from France, and the next one is washoku from Japan. So I would like to pick up these elements to make you understand better about the value as well as the criteria. So let me first start with the Mediterranean diet. Well, this Mediterranean diet was registered in 2013. It includes Spain, Cyprus, Greece, Morocco, and Portugal together. So this is a kind of collective registration by the countries along the Mediterranean Sea. I told you that this was registered in 2013, and this was highly or actively promoted to the people around the world. And eventually, this was perceived as a kind of healthy diet, because this food comes from the area where the climate is very mild and the scenery is very beautiful. We often call the culinary culture or the food culture, but the food itself is not the key point. I mentioned here that you also need to include the landscape as well, because this is again the cultural heritage. So it's a kind of cultural function. It's based on the symbolic and ethical relationship our communities have forged with the nature, landscape, and seasonal cycles, and the sustainable management of natural resources, particularly water. So the crops, so the farm crops coming from this area, and also the harvesting, as well as how to take out the fruit from the trees. All of these elements are included into the ICH. Of course, the fishing can be included as well, and also the livestock and how you make beef or pork out of the cattle. So the meat processing, preservation, cooking, are all included here. That is the key characteristics, because again, you can never overlook the unique climate as well as the landscape of the Mediterranean the area. So this is also used in the festive events.
이런 그 공동체 속에서 가지는 정체성이나 소속감 그리고 연속성이 재건되는 메커니즘이
So the Mediterranean diet also appears the cultural spaces of festivals. So these spaces and events become the receptacles of the gesture of the mutual recognition and respect and of hospitality and the neighborliness and the conviviality and intergenerational transmission of the intercultural dialogue. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the social and the cultural, the function of the Mediterranean diet. So of course this can be a bonding, and it also can promote the dialogue as well as communication among the members while enjoying the food. So I told you earlier about the social and the cultural function because it actually brings people together and the strengthen social link. I mentioned earlier that sustainable management of the natural resources, including water, is also highlighted. So because this definitely can make a contribution to the humanity. So food means more than nutrition. I think this is a very successful case. That is the reason why the Mediterranean diet it was registered in 2013, because this is really outstanding and the globally recognized model. Next, I'll talk about the lavash. This is the bread from the Armenia. This is also very traditional, the bread making, where this is widely used in the Armenian Republic, where this is a very, very thin and shared by all family members. And the tradition of baking lavash is widespread throughout the Republic of Armenia. And the lavash is a very traditional thin bread and is oblong shape and are quite light. So this was also registered in the UNESCO ICH. But of course, the preparation process is important, and the significance as well as the shape of the bread also can be the element of the culture. This is a daily food, but at the same time, this also is used as a kind of ritual item during the weddings as well as the other rituals. And in folklore, lavash is believed to have the power to destroy the evil and bring abundance and the purification to the home. This is very similar to the Jang culture that we have in Korea. In Armenia, the lavash has become a kind of a cultural code. Now let me move to the traditional Mexican cuisine, where this was also registered in the UNESCO ICH. And the Mexico is also using a lot of beans, and in the Mexican cuisine, the cultural model elements were also included, because the traditional Mexican cuisine is a comprehensive cultural model comprising farming and the ritual practices and age-old skills and the culinary techniques and ancestral community customs and the manners. So they recognize the value of the cultural characteristics. Of course, there are three major crops in the Mexico, and they use one of them to make this a traditional Mexican the cuisine. So in corn, bean, and chili are the three main original crops in the Mexico. This slide shows how the food culture is being handed down from their grandmothers to their daughters and then again the granddaughters. So this is not simply enjoyed by that generation itself. So maybe through the education, the traditional method is being transmitted. So when we talk about the Jang culture, we also need to emphasize how this technique is being handed down or how the value is being handed down. So again, we also need to consider these elements. I'd like to move on to the next part, which is the traditional dietary culture of Japan, washik. In Japan at that time, it had a lot of difficulties, especially the washoku. Whenever we talk about the washoku, this is normally closely related to the Japanese New Year. They also emphasize that this is being still preserved. So various elements had been reviewed and considered in submitting the dossier of the Washok. So I think they successfully combined all the important elements. So they said that this is definitely related to the sense of identity of Japan and how this is being handed down to the next generation. One more thing that we need to pay attention to is, of course, that Japan had some natural disasters, including the earthquake and the tsunami at the time. So sometimes people have some concerns on the food ingredients coming from Japan. So they try to dilute that concern by launching this kind of effort for successful registration of the washoku into the UNESCO ICH. So it really emphasized that this is a very healthy diet. This is a dossier, especially when you have when you review the dossier of the Japanese washoku, you can find these hidden efforts. So they celebrate the New Year, and the washoku is being enjoyed, and again, this is being handed down to the next generation. And this is also well educated to their next generation or their children. So they even have a cooking class for the small children. Well, of course, the washik has a very high nutritional value. So through sharing culturally, socially, and the nutritionally appropriate meals that other Japanese people consume and that their ancestors enjoyed, the Japanese people strengthen their sense of belonging, thereby confirming their identity as a Japanese. So the element also contributes to healthy life, longevity, and prevention of obesity. And in terms of the social and cultural functions, the elements foster family and social bonding or cohesion among families and communities, which include the very elderly and the handicapped. So food preparation for various events by community cooperation and the mutualism, such as rice pounding, is a very good example. Now, let me move on to the gastronomic meal of the French. So overall, this gastronomic meal of a French also shares the similar value that the washoku or the Mexican cuisine and the Armenia or the Mediterranean meals have. They also emphasize the festive meal element. So they're not simply focusing on the aesthetic element. They say it has a social value and it also has a ritual role as well. So it's not it is not specifying any menu. Of course, they sometimes they use this gastronomic meal of a French as eating well. So emphasize that they share this one when they need to celebrate the special occasions or the happy moments. So they also believe this is a kind of valuable asset, and also it represents the sense of identity. So the gastronomic meal is associated with the shared vision of eating well rather than the specific dishes. Now I'd like to talk about the kimjang and the kimchi making, and the democratic people, I mean North Korea also registered this one into the UNESCO ICH, and of course the Korea also put it on the list. So again, this is the sharing the culture. But this is something that you must be very much familiar with. So please allow me to skip due to the time constraints. Now I would like to talk about the common elements of the food culture inscribed in ICH. The first one is the sense of identity in the country, region, and the community. I already gave some examples, and then you will see these criteria is equally applied. And the second one is that this is a traditional but still living culture, because this is handed down from generation to generation. As you can see from this picture, the experts teach this food to the next generation. So this is again very essential part. The third one is the cohesion and the cooperation in the society. So this also can serve as a mechanism or the means for sharing, consolidation, and the communication. And the next part is the eco-friendly feature. So first of all, it should be very fresh, and it also should have a balanced nutrition, and it should come from the local ingredient, local crops. So they normally make this traditional food with not with the foreign ingredients, but with the ingredients that were grown locally. And it also has a traditional wisdom. And the next part is the ritual or the ritualized food, because it also should have the cultural value. So ritualized food may include many different occasions like a New Year celebration, wedding days, family union, and ancestor worship, and annual practices. This is going to be the last part. It's a sustainable development for the global community. So to make it as intangible cultural heritage, it should have some contribution for the sustainable development. So it should be eco-friendly. That is one of the elements. And next one is a healthy food. And the next part is the cultural diversity. So again, we may face a crisis if you have simply uniformity in our culture. That's why we really highly value the cultural diversity. And the last part is the self-sufficiency within the community. So you need to grow and plant and harvest within the community. You also need to emphasize this element of the self-sufficiency within community. I just cover some of the key features, mainly 6 key features for the UNESCO ICH. So let me conclude my presentation here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your very informative presentation. We're going to begin the Q&A session right away. We have collected a lot of questions, and I'm going to collect just a few. For the tourists who come here, what can you do to make the cuisine culture a bit more striking and a bit more resonating to the tourists?
I mentioned a little bit about the hot and spicy rice cake called the Korean dish of the tteokbokki. So if you really look around the other countries' cases, I think the first important thing is the Koreans also should enjoy it, and it should be consumed on a daily basis. And so this means that we need to develop, and we also need to preserve the local dishes so that the non-Koreans or the foreigners also can appreciate and enjoy. I think the kimchi at first was perceived as slightly negative because this is too hot and spicy, but these days we see a lot of people who actually favor or love kimchi. So this means that the kimchi culture in Korea can be developed well into the future, as well as we need to make a lot of effort. So we also can be proud of the kimchi. So UNESCO also emphasize the qualification. The first one is identification. So can we really claim that this is ours? So we need to, I mean, of course, we need to have affection toward this item so that even other people can appreciate and love it. This may sound too much like a common sense level, but we need to make it with all our effort. So this is not a kind of display of the food. So we should love it, and what we love and what we really appreciate will be favored also by non-Koreans. Thank you very much.
And next question. Back in 2013, when kimchi making was designated at a UNESCO ICH, that was remarkable. But if the Jang making culture is designated at a UNESCO ICH, what would be the meaning of it? And in terms of registering for, why is it important in Northeast Asia?
You have actually two questions. Let me respond to the first question. First question, you want to know the consequence, the impact of the Jang culture in the UNESCO ICH. I think first of all, the Jang making or Jang culture can be better promoted once this is registered into the UNESCO ICH. I think this culture also can be well expanded and spread to outside. So let me give an example of the kimchi, because kimchi also emphasize sharing it with other people, or we also make a lot of kimchi and then sometimes give away to the disadvantaged people within the society. Of course, you can share it with the neighbors, and we also can share it with the elderly people who cannot make a kimchi themselves. So this can be a very, very outstanding culture, and this can be actually widespread. I definitely believe that this can make a great contribution. And I think, of course, everybody knows that the bean is very beneficial, and people also know that the fermented food is very beneficial. But at the same time, we also need to emphasize advantages of the jang, because it has a social meaning, and it also serves as a kind of ritual food, and we also can learn something from the natural landscape. So again, we can have a chance to better review the value that it has. So that way, definitely this can be qualified for the ICH. Well, you mentioned that why the Asian countries are so much competitive in registering, because there are so many cultures they really are proud of, and the Northeast Asia, including Korea, China, Japan, have a very good conditions. And of course, I know that we are in a way we're prepared, because we can afford it, because in Japan as well as in Korea, we actually started this effort from the 1991, and of course the China is following us, but they're slightly lagging behind, but they also catch up. So we have all the favorable environment to make it possible. So of course the intelligence, of course the knowledge people make a proposal, and there's a kind of social pressure as well, because they understand the value.